This episode of the Craftsman Online podcast is sponsored by Bricks Masons. From elegant Masonic rings that showcase your commitment to our craft to finely crafted regalia and apparel that honor your tradition, Bricks Masons delivers quality and craftsmanship that truly stands out. Shop now at bricksmasons.com and use promo code CRAFTSMAN, that's CRAFTSMEN, to receive free shipping with your first order.
The comments, opinions, and views shared during this program are of those individual Freemasons and do not reflect the official position of a Grand Lodge, concordant body, appendant body, Masonic Authority, or craftsmanonline.com. Welcome to the Craftsman Online podcast, the only 5-star rated Masonic podcast endorsed by the Grand Lodge of New York. And now your host, Worshipful Brother, Michael Arce.
Welcome back. You've joined us for an episode on the Mormons and Freemasonry. I'm very excited to have our guest in this week. He's been on the Craftsman Online podcast before we actually kicked off this season with Worshipful Brother Hank Griffin, who's also the host of the You've Been Hanged podcast. But more importantly, he serves his grand jurisdiction, that's the Grand Lodge of Maryland, as the Grand Chaplain. He's also a past master. And inside this episode, we're going to be diving into that world where faith and fraternity collide. It's a very intriguing intersection because Brother Hank is also a Mormon, or as now you better know them as, a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and he's also a very proud member of our ancient and gentle craft here in Freemasonry. So, Brother Hank, welcome back to the Craftsman Online podcast.
Brother Michael, I'm so pleased to be here. Thank you for having me back.
Every week, I feel like I get a little window into your life growing up. I love the story. I love the history. I love traveling back in time with you. I love your family. It's always entertaining. There's always a message and a meaning in everything that you put out in the podcast. And we'll make sure that the link so our listeners can continue to find it is in the notes for this episode. You've Been Hanked. And we have the one and only Hank Griffin here on the Craftsman Online podcast. This episode is kind of a byproduct of 2 listener emails that we received here. One asked if I knew anything about the connection between Mormons and Freemasonry. That was the words they used, not mine. The other asked if there was any of a history between famous Freemasons like Joseph Smith. Do you ever recall hearing anything about that as you've been a member of the church all these years?
Absolutely. So in the early days of the church, not the very earliest days, but in those early formative days, there was a movement among the leadership and then later the brethren who weren't necessarily part of the leadership in the church to join themselves to Masonry. Joseph Smith, before the organization of the church, his father was a Mason. His older brother, Hiram, an interesting name, I think you'll agree, to Masons. And then later, Joseph Smith himself was one of those few people that was made a Mason on sight. There were a lot of men in the church came to Masonry. In fact, in Nauvoo, Illinois, at that time, there were more Masons in Nauvoo than in any other part of the state. It was a huge movement. And the reason that it didn't continue once they got into Utah is because there had been some bad blood. And that's too bad because one of the things that I like to talk about on my podcast, You've Been Hanked, is the intersections, both historical and in my own life, my own experience between my fraternity and my faith. These are things that mean a lot to me and that I just love.
I remember listening to a recent episode and you talked about how you, quote unquote, found your first lodge in beautiful East Texas and how it was this kind of dilapidated building that important men went into, and it could have benefited from having a little bit of better care on the outside, I think was the way that you had put it. I'm curious, we say the first place you're made a Mason is in your heart, then next in a lodge. You obviously were a member of the church before you were technically a member of the fraternity. Do you remember growing up in the church hearing about famous Freemasons or a connection between Freemasonry and the church?
Absolutely. So Joseph Smith, obviously a Mason, the founding member and organizer of our faith, but also Brigham Young, Joseph Fielding Smith, Harley P. Pratt. Brigham Young was maybe, aside from Joseph, maybe the most famous member of the church and also a Mason. And in fact, there's a number of pictures of him wearing a square and compass. That's one of those things that I really enjoy. I like to see that. And
yeah, I would say Brigham Young is probably one of the most famous Mormons. I mean, he does have a university named after him as well. So
he sure does.
It doesn't hurt when you have a school. And it might be interesting to our listener who's followed us along the path of Freemasonry. We've talked to other brothers or just those that have an interest in Freemasonry, and repeatedly will say Freemasonry is not a religion. It is not. But it is got a lot of links to faith, and as we get into this discussion tonight, you'll hear a lot of us talking about faith-based men who also are faith-based that found their way into Freemasonry from all churches. I think what you will find in Freemasonry is a little bit of philosophy, personal development, but in my research in our ritual and the history and the texts that come in Freemasonry, it was really about men trying to find or develop or enhance that relationship that they had with their creator. Is that kind of the same takeaway that you have when you look through the lens of Freemasonry as a member of your church?
I do. I have two distinct needs in my life that both of those organizations meet. When it comes to salvation, I don't find that in the lodge. I find that in my faith. When it comes to fellowship, but also what I like to refer to as Masonic enlightenment, which is a mortal thing. It's not that has nothing to do with my eternal soul, but it has everything to do with a good man working to improve himself in the company of other good men to become a better man. I find that so wonderfully available to me in Masonry that I wouldn't want to do without it. I need salvation, but I also need and desire the company of my brethren in my fraternity to help me perfect myself in this life as a mortal man.
I grew up in Yuma, Arizona, not beautiful East Texas, but sounds kind of similar when you hear how you describe your hometown in your podcast episode. Mine was pretty much a small border town in the very southwest corner of Arizona along the Colorado River with a very established, and again, I remember hearing this as a kid, LDS church, the Latter-day Saints church. What is the biggest stereotype or frequently asked question that you face or have that you face throughout your life as a Mormon?
Oh my gosh, Michael. The question that I've been most often asked is, how many wives do you have? Which it's so foolish. It is such a since Wilford Woodruff in the I think the late 1800s, the church has denounced the practice of plural marriage or polygamy. I certainly do not practice this, nor do I have any desire to practice. I struggle with my one very beautiful, wonderful wife who is about as much of a challenge as I want in life. I can't imagine trying to navigate that minefield, and I have never ever known anybody that is secretly doing that. That question has been asked of me so many times, and I wish that I could, I don't want to hurt anybody, but sometimes you just want to shake somebody and say, what are you thinking? Are you in earnest? I love that you grew up in a town where there was a large Latter-day Saint population. I did not. In fact, when I was a little boy back in Beautiful, I was literally the only, in those days we were commonly referred to ourselves as the Mormons. This in recent years, there's been a purposeful change in trying to use the full name of the church, which is the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. But before then, I was a little Mormon boy because that's how we were known back then. And I was the only one in my entire county school system. I was the only Latter-day Saint child in the entire. So there was no well-established community. Ironically, you, not of my faith, lived in a well-established community. And in fact, for the longest time, when we would go to church, we'd have to drive to Dallas, which doesn't mean anything to you, but it was a 90-mile drive one way, and then, turn around and come back home. And eventually we got to meet a little closer, and we'd only have to drive 40 miles one way. And then finally, my family played an integral role in establishing what we call a branch, which is the smallest unit or building that our faith has. we established a branch of our faith in Beautiful. And there were only 4 families attending, but my goodness, it really changed our lives. And the church has begun to grow in that part of the world in a way that it had never done before. So in my lifetime, I've seen my faith grow from almost absolutely nothing there to having a robust and vibrant community, in contrast to your experience, which was growing up in that.
Oh, yeah. I remember CTR rings, choose the right.
How about that?
The missionaries that they would walk around in pairs and, go door to door, spreading the word. Going to 4-H or FFA meetings, and we'd have no caffeine for the adults and the kids, because that was a big thing. And then now as an adult, I mean, here in the nation's capital, just, on the other side in Maryland, that beautiful Mormon temple that is there, that it just looks like it's something out of a Disney movie. It's just so beautiful every time you go by that at nighttime. And I think it's so interesting because the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and Freemasonry both have these very rich and at times complex histories. In my research for this episode, what I found was interesting is that the birth of the church really kind of began just before the Morgan affair. And there was a story of Joseph Smith in upstate New York, where I lived for a number of years. I'm curious what similarities you see between, the early converts to the church who faced prejudice and persecution for their faith, to Freemasons who have faced bitter resentment during the anti-Masonic movement, and even today with all of the Illuminati claims that seem to flame up online.
It's interesting to me to consider that we're talking about 2 organizations that have historically both dealt with real persecution. After the Morgan affair in the United States, Masonry was persecuted to the point where lodges were forced to close, where men were in fear of revealing that they were Masons for fear of real harm coming to them, their families, their businesses, their homes. They were under threat. And the same is true in my faith. It's funny because in Masonry, fortunately, we have a lot of tolerance for each other's faith. I mean, that's part of the deal. In order to be a Mason, you must believe in a supreme being, but the fraternity isn't particularly concerned about what that looks like, and we are taught to have patience for one another, irrespective of where you're from or what you believe or what you look like or what you sound like. And that's wonderful, but it's not foolproof. And there have been many times in the last 25 years, I've been a Mason for 25 years, where people have come to me and made comments and questioned what goes on in the temples and what my faith is all about. And the flip side of that is I've experienced some of that in my church too, about Masonry. And one of the things that was really helpful to me is several years ago, the church published a video, was Joseph Smith a Mason? And absolutely he was. Being able to demonstrate this, because there were people who didn't believe that, and also help them to understand that it wasn't just Joseph. There were a great many in the leadership of the church early on who were Masons, and in the common man who were Masons. That has been so helpful, if not entirely dispel the concerns and preconceived notions, at least to allay those concerns. And one of the things that has been a really good experience for me, you mentioned the Washington, D.C. temple. It is a beautiful, beautiful temple. So a few years ago, when the temple was renovated after the earthquake, they planned to close it down for 2 years. But one of the neat things that happened after that is they had an open house for everyone in the area, not just for members of our faith, but for everyone. But I had put out the word, hey, if anybody wants to go through with me, just say the word. And I wound up with a group of about 50 men, 50 Masons from across the jurisdiction of Maryland. It was tremendous. And I called the leadership over at the temple, and I said, this is who I am. And some of them knew me. I said, this is who I am, and I'm bringing a group of Masons. And there was a little bit of concern. What do you mean you're bringing a group of Masons? and I told them that I have a group of very good men who wanted to see the temple, like so many other good men and women wanted to do. And during the open house, I was going to take this as an opportunity to build some bridges. Afterwards, I had the leadership from the temple approach me and say, we just want you to know how much we appreciated what they referred to as the Masonic delegation. We didn't know what to expect, and it was so positive. And will you please express our appreciation to them? And then the flip side of that was I had many of the brethren who came to me, some as a group and others personally for days and even a couple of weeks after that, and say, Brother Hank, we had some preconceived notions that just weren't true and that really weren't very positive, that have been dispelled as a consequence of being able to see what you were able to show us. And we want to thank you for that. It moved the needle in the right direction. I really think that as we continue to have these opportunities for important intersections, those historic are great, but I'm talking about today. There's a good many Latter-day Saint Masons that are sort of coming out of the woodwork lately in Maryland that makes me very happy, and I want to see that number grow.
The Craftsman Online podcast is now sponsored by BricksMasons.com, our favorite destination for all of our Masonic shopping needs. Whether it's apparel for yourself or a cool gift idea for another brother, make BricksMasons.com your online marketplace where tradition meets innovation. Bricks Mason's new Masonic crystals are ideal for every member of your Knights Templar Commandery order, adding a Masonic touch to your home decor while also showing off your pride. They're made from premium materials with a beautiful, simple design showcasing the Holy Cross or the cross with the Bible. You can choose the perfect size for you, and if you want a solid wood base with an added light for a stunning display, you can opt for the gift box and make it a perfect present. Get yours now at BricksMasons.com. Visit BricksMasons.com and explore their extensive catalog. Elevate your Masonic experience with style and substance. Plus, Craftsman Online podcast listeners use promo code CRAFTSMAN, that's CRAFTSMEN, at checkout to enjoy free shipping with your first order. Hey, it's Worshipful Brother Michael Arce. This summer, you can join Freemasons around the country in celebrating the bicentennial anniversary of Brother Marquis de Lafayette's final goodwill tour of the United States. Visit us online at craftsmanonline.com to view our extensive Lafayette bicentennial calendar. Now, this is featuring some really cool parades, Masonic events like history talks with Masonic historian and author and friend of the Craftsman Online podcast, Brother Chris Ruley, also the New York Grand Lodge Lafayette Gala, the Lafayette French degree that'll be taking place in the city, and so much more. Plus, at craftsmanonline.com, you can share your lodge's celebration or event and add it to our calendar. See what's happening this summer as we roll out the red carpet for the celebration of Lafayette's bicentennial, and add your event at craftsmanonline.com. It's interesting. You have a really unique role as an esteemed member of your church and also Masonically. So in a Masonic lodge, we have an officer position that's called the chaplain. And their duty is to lead us in an invocation or prayer at the beginning and at the end of our lodge meetings, where we have the altar and a volume of sacred law in the center of the room. Some jurisdictions will call it a Holy Bible. Others will have a sacred text or maybe more than one different holy book that is placed. If you want to know why, we can talk later about why you should become a Freemason. That's a great question. But you have an interesting role, and you alluded to it as the Grand Chaplain of the Grand Lodge of Maryland. Talk about some of what your duties are with that and how they also kind of lend you to still be able to practice your faith and be an upright man and a Mason.
I have it's a gift. To serve in this role is a gift. It's a wonderful opportunity. As you said, we offer prayers at the beginning and the end of our meetings. But in addition to that, as a chaplain, we have significant responsibilities when it comes to memorial services. There are certain times in our initiatory experiences that the chaplain has an opportunity to be of value and use, which is meaningful for me. When we tend and conduct cornerstone, the laying of cornerstones, the chaplain has an opportunity to pray there. Good chaplains will, without needing to be told, will actively be reaching out to those brothers who are struggling, whether it's with illness or bereavement or anything that someone who has a spiritual stewardship would act proactively. Good chaplains are doing that. Every chaplain can have a ministerial experience that has very little to do with individual faith and everything to do with serving one's community and one's brother. See, pastors serve congregations, chaplains serve communities. The Masonic Lodge is a wonderful, and at least where I'm at, a beautifully diverse community. We have, in my lodge, we have Catholics and Latter-day Saints and Baptists and Hindus. We have Buddhists, we have Methodists, we have men who represent such a cross-section of faith and understanding. How does it help me to practice my faith, and how do I continue to be an upright Mason given this role? I get to minister and support in a spiritual stewardship such a beautiful cross-section of humanity that I might not have the opportunity to do in any other setting. It is a privilege. And in support of that, my faith, my church, has actually called and set me apart as a missionary, non-proselytizing, in conjunction with my service as the Grand Chaplain, specifically for the benefit of all Masons and their families in Maryland, in the entire state or jurisdiction of Maryland, with the express instruction to meet these men and their families where they are and as they are, and to love them and bless them and serve them just as I find them. It is a tremendous opportunity. To my knowledge, I'm the only Masonic chaplain in the world right now who is endorsed as a chaplain by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I hope that this will be an opportunity that will transcend me for decades and years to come.
I love that. It's such an honor, and it's for you, and it's also such an honor for us as Freemasons and member of the Ancient General Craft that we have a brother of your esteemed position to be able to do this. And I feel honored and special that you're on our podcast and that you get a chance to talk about this and just continue to just keep spreading that light. I was thinking back, I had made a comment or a reference to one of the quotes that I love from Andrew Smith, where he says, people fear what they don't understand and hate what they can't conquer. And that comes to my mind when I think of, we talked about the stereotypes, but some of the beliefs that people hold about the Church of Christ of Latter-day Saints and about Freemasonry together. Although there are some areas where I could see having those viewpoints are justified, especially when it comes to the role of secrecy and exclusivity that exists in Freemasonry and the Mormon Church. And those of us that are on the inside of one, or in your situation, both of those, you could see why that has to exist. And sometimes the secrets just really aren't a big deal. They just have to be secret to protect other people that are involved with the organization. It's not a bad secret. It's a good secret. How do you feel about the role of secrecy and exclusivity when it comes to your church and also to the craft?
I don't think that the word secret is inappropriate. I do think that the connotation of that word is different than the one that is best used here, and that is, I would change it from secret either to sacred in terms of my faith, and sacred is also appropriate in Masonry. Although I will say that Maynard Edwards, I saw him give a talk one time in a lodge meeting where he said, we don't keep these things secret, rather we keep them private. And the analogy that he used is, when we consider marriage, the private nature of the relationship between a husband and his wife, it's not secret. We all sort of understand how that works, but it is private. And it is sacred, and it's something that we don't go around talking about, at least if we are good men. I think that applies in both. In order for Masonry to confer a truly memorable initiatory experience on a good man who desires to be a better man, there are things that happen in that initiatory experience that we want to keep private for the benefit of that man who's going to experience that, we hope, in its purity. And of course, with the internet, whether you're talking about Latter-day Saint temples or Masonic temples, there's very little that really is secret anymore. However, there is still a great deal that is both sacred and of such worth that it is worth keeping private. I think that is true in both of those places, in both of those spaces.
We're going to close out this episode of the Craftsman Online podcast with this last question for you, Brother Hank. And again, thank you so much for being so generous with your time. You've stated on your podcast that you're a writer, storyteller, Latter-day Saint, Freemason, family man, community builder, Parkinson's warrior, force of nature. Every time I hear that, I smile. As we close out our time together on this episode, what's the one thing that you want our listener to take away from, whether it's about the Church of Christ of Latter-day Saints or about Freemasonry, or maybe both together?
The thing that I would encourage them to take away is, in the 21st century, we have the benefit of looking back in history and recognizing that truly good men and great men and women that have gone before us, who accomplished extraordinary things, were not necessarily perfect. I don't think we can be. They weren't perfect. They made mistakes. They did things that makes us cringe sometimes. And there's a movement afoot to cancel some of them. What I would prefer to see is rather than criticizing and seeking to cancel, that we hold up the good. I don't know that condemning is the word that I'm looking for here, but concentrating on improving what can be improved on. In Masonry and in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, we recognize that historically there have been some instances where people have made decisions that, golly, we wish that had gone a little bit differently. But that doesn't or shouldn't taint either of those organizations. Rather, that should be an opportunity to highlight what is good and maybe give us focus on what we could do better. That temple trip that I mentioned, where I had, there were actually three, the largest of the three, there were about 50 of us. That was a wonderful opportunity to increase understanding among two groups that frankly have a lot of significant historical intersections, but do not have a lot of current understanding. We need more of that. And it doesn't matter if we're talking about the Mormons, the Latter-day Saints, the Masons, all faiths that are faiths are welcome in the Masonic fraternity. And all good men and women who are earnest in their desire to come and build ecumenical bridges are welcome in our Latter-day Saint congregations. I have several friends in my congregation who are of the Jewish faith. My goodness, I love having them there. I don't understand necessarily why they're there, but I'm delighted that they are. I know that they also go to synagogue on Saturdays, and I couldn't be happier that they're there. There are real opportunities for good men and women who have pure intentions to better understand each other and build one another up instead of seeking to tear each other down, and rather to love each other because we are all brothers and sisters, maybe not in our faith, but in our creation, in our DNA, in our genes. I struggle with the desire to tear down, and I revel in the desire to build up and to assist each other.
I know I could listen to you all day and I could definitely talk to you all night, but unfortunately, all good things must come to an end. Worshipful Brother Hank Griffin, host of the You've Been Hank podcast, thank you so much for making some time to get back on the Craftsman Online podcast. Thank you so much, brother.
Worshipful Brother Arce, thank you for having me. I really appreciate and respect the work that you're doing, and I look forward to continuing to listen to the Craftsman Online and for us to continue our friendship.
This has been the Craftsman Online podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, make sure you follow us on Spotify or click subscribe to do so on Apple Podcasts. We've got new episodes ready for download every Monday morning. You could do us a little favor too. A little comment, little like, a little love. Anything you add to this podcast episode makes it so much easier for us to connect with those who have an interest in Freemasonry. This is Worshipful Brother Michael Arce, thanking you for your time this week. Until next time, let peace and harmony prevail.